Good afternoon, everyone. This week's episode, we're going to discuss racial attitudes in children and how our actions as members of the society affect our children, either directly or indirectly. Before we begin, let's look at a couple pieces of legislation. These legislations were passed in the 20th century, towards the beginning half. The first that we can discuss is the Immigration Act of 1924. This act was passed essentially to derail diversity of any kind in America. Now, you may wonder why. Why would this happen? Why would we do something that would deface what we worked for in the civil rights movements that started with the Civil War, that started with the culmination of events that led to the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments? Well, we can really look at the time period that this legislation was passed. Being after World War I, there was such a short time span of so much chaos and so much destruction that perhaps it was just to protect borders of the United States. Perhaps maybe it was fear that motivated them, but most likely it was just from being used to some sort of social standard that was enabled by a long history of consistency of slavery being in our country, that even once the slavery was officially declared as illegal, there were methods of unofficial slavery, such as the Plessy versus Ferguson decision back in the turn of the century, in the 19th century. We see here the separate but equal clause, and for me personally, I don't really understand how separate but equal actually is equal, but I guess that may be a good thing, because let's face it, if I don't get it, then clearly there's been something that has changed from then to now that has allowed for people like me to question it, to say, well, why did this even happen? Anyways, my point being is that we can look at other stuff, legislation, for example, particularly the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We can examine it mainly because it was a landmark decision. The nation set up precedents for discrimination against race, color, ethnicity, sex, nationality being not okay at all. Completely illegal. Great. But there's still an issue there. And that has to do with us. Me, you, as an individual. Because the government can control our speech and our actions to a certain degree. That's why there's laws to prevent certain things from happening without consequences. However, they can't control our thoughts. So what I'm trying to say is it starts with in here, in our minds, and then it comes out as actions, as words, as whatever it may be, whatever outlet it may be for our thoughts, our hearts, our emotions that come out towards a certain group of people. If we look at the legislation that was passed, we can even look at more modern examples, such as the Civil Rights Act in 1990, which just relayed some precedents set by earlier acts, such as jury by trial and whatever. We can see continual strides to make our society a better place for all people of all nationalities. In terms of racial attitudes, we can see that there have been very direct methods of getting these racial attitudes to a more positive, positive, for the lack of a better term, view of people from different nationalities, color, of skin, what have you. Because, let's face it, there's racism and prejudice not only between color of skin, but also within color of skin, between nationalities, between people of British descent and Italian descent, between those of Japanese and Chinese descent, whatever. These prejudices still exist. So people may say, well, hey, what was the point of all that civil rights stuff? Well, here's the point. The civil rights movement mainly provided direct methods for, let's just go with controlling racial attitudes, or better yet, promoting more positive racial attitudes. Now, I hate to use the word positive, negative, controlling, words like that, but that's kind of what it is. And feel free to leave comments if those terms feel less suited than others to you, because I will definitely take them into consideration for my next videos. Anyways, back to the main point. When we look at racial attitudes, we have to also look at indirect things, because these things have continued in our society, and they're dangerous. They're perhaps more dangerous than direct methods, because let's face it, if it's indirect, we're not going to notice it as much. So what we need to do is we need to focus on what we're saying, what we're doing, whether it's in the presence of our children or not, because let's face it, even if a child is present, they can find out about things anyways. Our children are capable of a number of pathways, development, per any given time period. So let's face it, a couple minutes, couple hours, couple days, couple weeks, couple years, these children are going to learn so much and are going to be influenced by a lot of factors. So if we don't promote equality, perhaps through not only color of skin, but through gender and what have you, nationality, for example, as well, we're going to see a lot of continuation of these old, less progressive, as our society likes to call it, less progressive ideas towards certain individuals. So it's important that we look at how we can affect our children and how much they can learn from us. Essentially, the point of this video is to address the fact that we, as an individual, as a community, can and do and will have an effect on our children across generations. So therefore, let us not, myself included, I am guilty of so many of these things, and I'm not going to say that I'm not. Let us, myself included, focus on ourselves and our community and on others, not only in terms of helping each other out and promoting these more positive attitudes, but also in not being afraid to call out the ones we know and say, hey, this may not be the best way to approach this issue, but let's figure out the best way to do so. Let's figure out the most appropriate measure to take for this given action, this given speech, this given sentence, this given word that we choose as an individual or a community that we convey upon other people. So my hope is that from this video, that through the comments that are posted, through what have you, that we can start continuing this change for people, that we can continue to go before each other and say, hey, you're different from me, but I like that. It provides for me something that I would not have expected unless I was exposed to people different from myself. One last thing is I want to encourage everyone to just be positive. and remember that we can do this, that it's going to take time. Of course it's going to take time. This is hundreds of years in the making. And yes, we have had monumental changes. We went from 1924 and earlier with the Immigration Act, Chinese Exclusion Act, Gentlemen's Agreement, internment camps in World War II for Japanese Americans, to all of a sudden in 1960s, after years of work, years of planning from civil rights movement leaders, we have laws that have been passed from the 60s to the present that have done tremendous efforts in curbing racial prejudice and discrimination and all of those sorts of things that we can continue to look to as examples. So, with that being said, I think that with children's racial attitudes, that yes, it can be done. We can promote more positive attitudes. However, it is up to us. So thank you guys for listening. I know it's just like talking, so it can be kind of boring sometimes, but just try to leave a comment, subscribe if you want to our video feeds. We'll most likely be posting more episodes as we continue along, and I thank you for watching and hope to see y'all next week.